My name is Bilal Tanveer. I'm the co-director of the Rumani Center. We are absolutely delighted to welcome two very distinguished scholars to this discussion on Faiz Ahmad Faiz's oeuvre. This gathering is occasioned with the publication of a landmark critical edition of Faiz Ahmad Faiz's collected works titled Kulliyāt-e-Faiz that should be available for you to buy shortly after the event. It is the first critical edition of Faiz Ahmad Faiz's work that collates all extant editions and notes all the textual variations in all the multiple editions that have been published so far. This edition also standardizes the text. Each poem and every line have been given a fixed numerical identification. Citing Faiz has consequently been rendered globally uniform in scholarly writings. We will use the occasion of this important scholarly contribution to reflect more deeply as well as broadly on Faiz's work and the resonance of his work in our times. The two scholars present here in their writings have considered Faiz's work in original as well as contrasting ways. And I'm sure that today's discussion will offer us new ways to consider this poet whose work continues to ring across the globe wherever Urdu is spoken, in registers ranging from love poetry to protest verse. The editor of the volume Kulliyāt-e-Faiz is Dr. Syed Nomanul. He is the founder dean of the School of Liberal Arts at the University of Management Technology, Lahore, as well as a visiting distinguished professor of comparative liberal studies at Reed University. He has remained a senior faculty member at LUMS for several years, something that I can testify to. And I think one of the things that is not obvious in his bio is his profound impact that he's had on students who have gone on to pursue various humanistic disciplines in the humanities. And I think that's a contribution that does not appear on Dr. Nomanul Haq's CV, but I think that's a profound contribution that he's made, because I remember in 2006 when I just graduated from LUMS, Dr. Noman had just come in, and I was here for one more year working as a research assistant. And I could see the enormous impact that his presence had on young people, and the number of students he's inspired who've then gone on to do their PhDs in various humanistic disciplines is quite remarkable. Dr. Noman has written on various subjects, including Islamic intellectual history, Islamic mysticism, as well as Urdu poetry. His books include Names, Natures and Things, The Alchemist Jabir ibn Hayyan, and his Kitab al-Ahjar, God, Life and the Cosmos, Theistic Perspectives, Haris Khalid's Selected Verse, a critical edition of Abdur Rahman Bijnori's Mahasane Kalam-e-Ghalib, and as well as he's the editor of the first Kulliyāt-e-Faiz. With us is also Professor Aamir Mufti, who is a professor of comparative literature at University of California, Los Angeles. He's the author of two books, Enlightenment in the Colony, The Crisis of Post-Colonial Culture, and Forget English, Orientalisms and World Literature. Among his many significant contributions are pioneering essays that rethink some of the fundamental concepts and categories of the Western humanities, such as the secular, the minor, the cosmopolitan, the exilic, the migrant and refugee, the Anglophone, and the world itself, from the perspective of the colonized and post-colonial societies. This is Professor Mufti's third visit to LUMS, and we are deeply, deeply grateful to him for making his presence a regular feature of our annual intellectual calendar. We all benefit from his presence here at LUMS, and this is an inside joke between myself and Professor Mufti that he's, we really work him to ground while he's here. So he has engagements from morning until evening. And he's leading, 3-hour-long seminars in the morning. In the afternoon, he's meeting students, and in the evening, he's giving public talks. But we are very, very grateful to him for making this time and being here despite his very busy teaching and research calendar. So the format of today's program is that I'm going to invite Dr. Nomanul Haq first and ask him to speak about the Kulliyāt-e-Faiz project, its editorial process, and its significance for our broader literary world. After that, I'm going to invite Professor Aamir Mufti to talk about Faiz in his time and ours, as well as issues in Faiz reception and scholarship. I just also want to note my colleague Fatma Fayaz was supposed to join us as a discussant, but she's unable to because of a tragic passing away of her mother, so she won't be able to be here with us. Dr. Noman, can I ask you to please?
Bilal, thank you so very much for this very generous introduction of yours. It is not possible for me to come to Lums and not feel emotional about it. These walls and these corridors, they call me back to my times here. Let me also acknowledge that I'm a bit nervous. Such accomplished scholars. Mufti Sahab, he was telling me a minute ago that he's nervous. Quite contrary, he's making me nervous. Let me also acknowledge one thing that I wanted to do in public, and it is that this project, which began many years ago, a motive force for this was Adil Hashmi. Adil's jovial facade is really misleading. He's a very serious person and very responsible. He's a thorough gentleman. And I don't think that without his interest in this project, we would have completed it. So, I want to acknowledge this in public. Another thing that I need to acknowledge is that my student, my assistant, Gul, who went to Boston University and did his master's degree in editorial studies, and now he's doing his doctorate at Boston University again. He has really helped me tremendously on this project, tremendously, day and night. In fact, I wanted his name to be on the cover. He didn't agree. I tried, I insisted. I even spoke to his mother, but he didn't agree, so his name is not on the cover. And I really miss him. I wish he had been here. Let me say a few words about a critical edition. First of all, do remember that we in Pakistan, we have stopped doing these things. There was a generation, an older generation, and they did remarkable work. Imtiaz Ali Arshi worked on Diwan Ghalib, and he worked at a time when there were no computers, and his room would be full of cards, a room as big as this, full of index cards on which he took notes. He worked on Diwan Ghalib, but that was many years ago. We have some other people, Rashid Hasan Khan and Mushfiq Khaja and all that, but among younger scholars, this trend has ceased. And this is really a pity. This is real work in the humanities. It involves philology, it involves textual investigations, and it is really our responsibility to determine a definitive text of a writer or of a poet. Faiz Sahab, I often say, and I have said this also in my introduction, that Faiz Sahab's humility, his softness, actually, it became a hindrance because he did not care. I remember when in London, I was very young at that time when they published Sare Sokat Hamare, and he was asked to speak about it. He was just very uninterested. He just wanted to, for people to be thrown off his back so that he can go and have a cigarette. He didn't want to talk about the book or about himself. So there were many errors that were introduced in his editions. Not only that, but there are variations too. There are strange things. For example, one poem might have one date in one edition and another date in another edition. One poem would be in one collection, in one edition, and then it would fly to another collection. Inconsistencies in the spellings, in punctuations, and so on. And more than that, Faiz Sahab, as a person, he's also part of our political and ideological history. He's not only part of our literary history, he's also part of our ideological and political history. So he suffered quite a lot as a result, and also gained quite a lot. He suffered, but also he gained. I don't want to paint a sob story of Faiz Sahab. Faiz Sahab really was loved. Everybody cared about him. He was not ignored. So what happened was that in some cases, parts of his poems were suppressed. One of the problems, by the way, which all of us should understand, and it is that when books are published in Pakistan, they don't give you the publication date. So much so that even this book does not have a publication date. I insisted, I tried, I called, I made protests, and yet this book has no publication date, except that you can figure out the date because I have dated my muqaddimah. My muqaddimah has a date, so you can roughly say circa so and so, but the publisher did not put a date. So I really cannot really trace the chronology of what happened. These days, one poem of his, whose title nobody knows, it is a Quranic phrase, nobody knows, hum dekhenge, lazim hai ki hum bhi dekhenge. The title is وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ, which is from the chapter of the Quran, Ar-Rahman, وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ. Nobody knows that. And that poem is now again on the horizon. It has remained on the horizon for a long, long time. Now it is very interesting that this poem is quite neatly keyed to the time of the Al-Haq. But really, this poem arises out of many poems. In 1952, his collection Daste Sabah came out. And Daste Sabah has a tarana, in which this line, exists in Daste Sabah. And then in 1967, Sare Wadi Sina, Fir Bas Porunahas, Sare Wadi Sina. There he has lines which were suppressed. Now I know that though I say this, that those lines are available in Sare Sukhan Hamare and in Sare Wadi Sina's first edition, but then they disappeared. Yeah. They disappeared, and why they disappeared and when they disappeared is very difficult to determine because we have no dates. So what edition comes out, we really don't know. But I have added it in my footnotes. I have completed the poem as it was in its original form. Then he uses the same lines in وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ hum dekhenge, lazim hai ki hum bhi dekhen, he repeats the same line. And then he repeats those lines also in a poem in Mere Dil Mere Musafir, in a poem called Teen Awazein, Three Voices. Jab takht giraye jayenge, jab aadam chale jayenge. Now this is textual history, and this textual history can only be known, and if we mean business, we have to know the text of Faiz Sahab. If we just want to make it a fashion, if we just want to make it a commodity, that's another matter. But if we are serious, and as scholars, we are humble and serious. We are very serious. So one would not know that this is the case, and the fact that the poem I'm taking it, and all these four were Tarana, Sare Wadi Sina, Teen Awazein, and Wayabqa Wajhu Rabbika, they are all connected. So one thing again is that if you neatly want to key one of these to a specific political event, it will be wrong. It will be oversimplified. This is way more complex, and poetry is way more. Poetry is not a report. It is not a Thana report. It's something else. It's a complex process. It arises out of experience, but it must transcend experience too. And Faiz Sahab was a poet. He was a real high-quality poet. So he's not reporting things. He is giving his experiences a poetic treatment. And once he gives it a poetic treatment, they gain a kind of universality And that's why they're so meaningful, and they do not become topical poems like many of the people do write topical poems. So that is one thing. So when we do critical editions, I was saying to Aamir, if I may call you by your first name, I was telling Aamir that this is really a very lonely pursuit. It's a lonely pursuit because you have to look at each and every word and comma and period and colon and semicolon and m dash and n dash. You have to compare different editions, and you know each and every dot there has to be looked at. And then the inconsistencies, you know, sometimes one has to make a decision what spelling one would standardize, which one of these will be your base text. One has to decide around which you note the variations, but the base text has to be decided. All these things take a very long time, and there were times when I really wanted to give up. I thought I would not go on, and then I would receive a phone call from Abil Hashmi wondering what happened, and so on. So anyway, it has seen its end. The other thing that one does, other than noting textual variations and giving a textual history and fixing the text, and I'm not saying that what I've done is definitive, but it tends to be definitive. It has now made all editions redundant, really, but it can still be improved. So we have a critical apparatus. This is a technical term, critical apparatus, in which we have abbreviation, and then we give all the variations and additions and so on in the critical apparatus. The second thing one does is to standardize the work. I mean, Aristotle, this much of Aristotle is fully standardized, this much of Plato is fully standardized. We have no standardization of Ghalib, we have no standardization of Iqbal, really. This is really a pity. It shows where we are as an intellectual, people, where we are. We don't have that for Peer Sahab, we don't have for Ghalib. So what one does is to standardize. Now, referring to Faiz Sahab has become universal. If you say Faiz 3:7, everybody knows what 3:7 is. I've done that, and it is not easy given the limitations of the software, Urdu software, and given the idiosyncrasies of my designer who lives in Multan, who would disappear for weeks and weeks and weeks, and you look for him. It is not very easy to do. So we have to standardize the text. The third thing is that we have indices. Now we have first line index. We have a first line index. If you remember the first line, you easily find it in the text. So hum dekhen in under ha, you'll find hum dekhen in number so and so, and you can actually get to the text of hum dekhenge. And then there's another index of time, and not time, but place and date of the poems as much as they're available. There's another index. So you can find out which poem was written when, as long as Faiz Sahab indicated that. And that's why, I say that this whole, popular stuff of attaching his poems neatly to a specific event really undermines Faiz. Faiz is way more complex, much more complex. Let me tell you, as I have pointed out in my muqaddimah, that his rebellious poems were written even before Pakistan was created. He spoke about Zanjeer and Salasil and Siyasaddan, Zinda, Bol Kela Azad hai tere, Bol Daba Khab teri hai. This is pre-Pakistan. He was a kid, he was like 23 years old, one of the youngest people here at their age, when he wrote that. And then when he was really going through a very happy phase of his life, very happy, ascending career, he wrote poems that are full of pathos. आसमानों से जुए तो दर्द रवां मुज़महिल लय कबाब हस्ती की हल्के सुरों में नौहा कुना. Full of pathos. Kutte, the poem Kutte is in the very first section. ये गलियों के आवारा बेकार कुत्ते के बख्शा गया जिनको ज़ौक़ गदाई, नाराम दिन को नराहत सवेरे, गिराजत में घर नारियों में पसेरे. This was written before Pakistan. He had not converted to communism, if I may use that word. He was not threatened by Liaquat Ali Khan's government. There was no zindani, yet he speaks about zindani. देख के आहनगर की दुकानें तुंद है शोरे, सुर्ख है हम, खुलने लगे कुफरों के दहाने, फैला हर एक जंजीर का दामन. This is young Faiz. This is young Faiz, and then some of the ghazals are such that I wonder if this is Faiz because it's so different from what he did later. Husn क्या है? Husn मिन्नत कशे फसून नियाज़, इश्क मरहून जोश फ़ादा नाज़. This is the kind of poetry that he wrote. It's a very complex situation. To read poetry as a biography of the poet is a sickness. It is an ailment. One should cure that. One should. What he loves me, this word I have borrowed from Shamim Hanafi, who said कि शायद इस शेर को उसके सवाने के तौर पर पढ़ना एक ऐसी बीमारी है जिसका इलाज मुमकिन नहीं. ऐसी बीमारी. Now, Faiz is not a reporter. He is not a reporter of a khana. He is not a reporter of a newspaper. He is a poet, so he gives it a poetry. And the relationship. It is true that we live a life in a society. It has its pressures. There is politics, the economy. All these things, they affect us. But then, as I said, you give them a treatment and do something else. Otherwise, it becomes topical poetry. As Iqbal said, "Manu tu se paida, manu tu se pa." Manu tu se paida, born out of thee and me and going beyond thee and me. Well, I said that. This is how it. Now, finally, now that I have spent. I am grateful to Faisal that he ushered me into modern poetry. I'm a man of classics. I love classics in music and art and poetry. So I was into Aamir and Ghalib and Musafi, Sada. I was into that. But then I happened to bump into a verse of Faisal when I was like, I don't know, 17 or 18. अभी तकमील को पहुँचाने की सामीर जुनून अभी चलती रहे दीवानों की दीवानों से. It was such a voice. ये कहाँ से आवाज़ आई? चलती रहे दीवानों की दीवानों से. And then I started reading Faisal, and it is through his eyes that I entered modern poetry. Then I read, Nomanul, Rashid, and Nasir Kazmi, and Miraji, and all that. So how lucky I am! How lucky that my usher is Faiz and Faiz. So I've spent so much time. In fact, my assistant, whom I miss here, Eid Gul, he grew up with Faiz. When he started working with me, he was 18, and now he's nearly 30. So he grew up with Faiz. So I have a point of view on Faiz, and I think I should be given serious audience because I spent so much time. And I don't think it is really accurate to call him Inqalabi or Muzahim and so on. His beauty is his romance. Whenever he is not formulaic, like the Talaqi Basan progressive, he is at his height. He really drops a little bit, one notch below when he becomes formulaic. One feel behti bina surur se वगैरह के वाबस्ता हैं उस हुस्न की यादें जिसने ज़िक्र परीखाना बना रखा था. Beautiful poem, but then he goes into that formula. So whenever he is not, as I said that the other day, that his beautiful poem, ये धूप किनारा शाम ढले मिलते हैं दोनों वक्त जहाँ. He ends it so nicely. जब तेरी समंदर आँखों में इस शाम का सूरज डूबेगा सुख सोएंगे दर वाले और राही अपनी राह लेगा. Now this is it. राही अपनी राह कहाँ जाएगा, क्या करेगा, छोड़ दिया धुआं सा. It's a smoke. You have to look at the trail of the poet. Where has he gone? Where has he disappeared? This is poetry. This is high poetry. उसका ताजुन का जब वो ताजुन उसका हो जाता है, it is fixed, it loses interest. उसमें तकसीर होती है, plurality of meaning. when the meanings are plural, when there are many, जब तक कसरत हो माना की ना, कई पहलू हों, कई अक्षरों, then it is real poetry. Otherwise, you should read Jamil Habib Jaleh. So this is what I'm saying, that he is, and what I remember of Faiz Sahab is all, I mean, whatever is sung of Faiz Sahab is all romantic. Gulon mein rang bhare, baade no bahar chale, nothing muzahimati in this, right? Aaye kuch abr, kuch sharab aaye, uske baad aaye jo azab aaye, right? What is muzahimati about that? ये कि वो रंग पैरा उनका खुशबू जुल्फ लगाने का नाम मौसम गुल है तुम्हारे बाम पर आने का नाम बिन पिए हूँ कि अगर लुत्फ करो आखिर शब बिन पिए हूँ कि अगर लुत्फ करो आखिर शब सुर्खी मैं भले सुबह के आवाज करन. This is real fast. This is real fast. रह गुजर छाए शजर मंजिल दर हल्के बाम परसी नए महताब खुला आहिस्ता जैसे कोले कोई बंदे कबा आहिस्ता. This is real fast. तो ये बात भी ज़हन में रहे कि he whenever he is non-formulaic, whenever he lets himself go, जब लगाम निकाल देते हैं, when the reins are removed, when there are no reins, when he is free, then he is at his best and he is a true poet. I think I'll stop here. I'm here to listen to Aamir too. So it's all, that's all I'll say for now. We'll see how things go.
In his presence, because he is a scholar of Faiz of a remarkable stature, this book is, this collection is really an incredible achievement. And we are just so grateful to you for having done this work so that we don't have to do it. Chasing after people in Multan for 10, 12 years, no, I don't think so. So thank you for that. It really is, and if I may sort of say a few words about some of the things you've said, you are absolutely right that, Imam Sahib is absolutely right that there is a strange dearth or shortage of reflection on the meaning of Faiz, let's put it that way. As you say, a lot of it is reduced to a biographical sort of register. And Faiz, who is ubiquitously present in Pakistan and Pakistani life, and as we now see in Indian life, in remarkable ways. I'll say a little bit more about that. I'm writing a long piece actually trying to interpret this whole turn to in Indian politics. I mean, it's at the center of Indian politics right now in this very strange way, brought in by young people of all backgrounds, religion, caste, linguistic backgrounds. It's not something that so people of Muslim, Islamic background are doing alone, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so it's a very strange fact that we don't have really a long tradition of, let's say, debate and argument about the meaning of Faiz. We speak of him fairly unproblematically sometimes, often as our national poet, but it's not really clear what that means. Because in some very serious ways, Faiz is a poet of no nation. We have to understand that. Is not a flag waver, is not someone who affirms a certain national or religious or any other type of identity, but really someone who approaches identity in a very radically critical way. So all those questions have not been asked. I tried some years ago to answer some of these questions, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a book of mine, which I don't think has really had much circulation. It's a cause of real sadness for me in Pakistan. It's not. In India, it's had some circulation. And now, in fact, there is going to be an edition, an Indian edition, which I'm hoping that they will, a second edition of the book, which I'm hoping they will distribute well in Pakistan. So perhaps it's really, it's something I really wish for very much. It's a book called Enlightenment in the Colony. You can find it on Library Genesis. You know, when in my Los Angeles classroom, I have this thing, I'll ask students to raise their hands, who knows of Library Genesis? All the third world people raise their hands, the Americans have no idea at all. So all this is really inconsistent, I mean shabbily inconsistent sort of apparatus of publishing that has been directed at him, really embarrassingly shabby. All of that you've got your way through, and really it's just it's such a pleasure. I'm still making my way through the book. It'll be some time really before I can say I've understood some, most of what you have accomplished here. So one of the questions really that we could think about is, what is a definitive or standard edition? This is clearly a standard edition now, and attempts very powerfully to be a definitive edition. It seems to me to have worked through inconsistencies and variations and omissions and contradictions between different editions and so on, different collections. So what exactly is a standard edition? All kinds of issues of that sort you've addressed here, the poet's intentions perhaps, to the extent that they can be discovered, and that's always a tricky matter, what the poet's intentions are and whether we should care or not what the poet's intentions were, okay? Because in the end we have a bunch of words on a page, and the poet has parted with these words, and I don't know that we need to be entirely dependent on some sense of what the poet may or may not have intended. Nevertheless, it's very much part of establishing a standard edition, definitive edition. So that is also something that Nomanul has done exceedingly well here. But he is being a little too modest. I have to say that. Because this kind of editorial work is also a creative act. Okay, it's not just a question of establishing what the poet may have intended each poem to be like, which variation he may have preferred, and so on and so forth. It's always a creative act on the part of the editor, and I think this is such a creative exercise. And as I said, we owe a huge debt of thanks to him. You said something interesting towards the end, where you said it's not accurate to call him revolutionary, and I would slightly disagree with that. I think in the normal sense, you're absolutely right. If we simply say he's a Muzahmati Shair. So I'll tell you one little anecdote. Chaudhry Muhammad Naeem Saab in Chicago, who was a leading Anglophone critic, meaning writing criticism in English, like I do. Critic of Urdu literature from India. He in the manner of the Jadidi critics is very anti-Faiz, just dismisses Faiz entirely, and actually said to me, Jalib is a much greater poet than Faiz. Okay, so but you were just saying at the end the exact reverse. I think the revolutionary element is a very powerful one in his poetry, and it cannot be ignored. But you're absolutely right that, unlike, say, he's not Sardar Jafri, he's not some of the other progressive writers and so on. But there are others in his own generation, in the progressive writers group association, of whom we can say the same thing, like Nomanul, for instance, and others. In India, I think perhaps more than here. Okay, so just a few comments about the very important points that you've raised. So it seemed to me many years ago when I began to work on Faiz, and it took me a long time as well, very long time, because I had a completely ridiculous colonial education in Pakistan. I mean, the whole O-level, A-level track, what we used to call senior Cambridge and all that. Urdu was taught as a second language, syllabus B. Those of you who've done Cambridge will know that. I mean, it's still a cause of great shame for me that I went through high school and that I was taught Urdu as a foreign language. The syllabus was called Urdu as a foreign language. This must still exist, there must be 2 tracks, is that right? No Urdu literature at all, or any vernacular languages of South Asia, entirely English, and of course math and science and all that. English literature at a fairly advanced level, but no Urdu literariness in any sense. So I came very late to Urdu. I'm entirely self-taught, and my work therefore reflects many, the weaknesses that come with that. I'm acutely aware of that I'm entirely self-taught. self-made man, shall we say, and and you know, problems come with that, and I've learned to sort of live with that. There are shortcomings of all sorts, I'm sure. So when I started sort of working with Faiz, and this was for my PhD dissertation at Columbia University, I worked with Edward Syed, and I kind of introduced him to Faiz's poetry, although he had met Faiz once during the Beirut years and has talked about it very movingly in one of his essays called Reflections on Exile. जब फैज साहब वहाँ पे exile में थे basically during the Israeli attack on Beirut, and that's when he left and came back. Anyway, several problems presented themselves to me when I began to read Faiz's criticism, and of course just make my way through Faiz, which was an extraordinary experience, and I did it on many continents over many years. I have memories of reading various things of his in a little Barsati flat in Delhi. You know, I read them in New York, I read them in Karachi, and so on. London, many places. And so it was this very long process of learning this thing and learning really a whole civilization, I would say, through a close encounter with this poetic corpus. So several problems presented themselves to me once I had found some footing in this body of work and in this set of problems. One of them, of course, he's a very, in religious terms, anti-orthodox and anti-clerical writer, right? The figure of Mufti is a very evil figure in Faiz's poetry, right? My ancestors. Yet he widely uses a religious idiom, widely in many poems, and of course, Kulliyāt-e-Faiz is very notorious right now for that reason, being called an anti-Hindu poem and things of that sort. But there are many others in which there's religious language of various sorts, very often, of course, drawing from the Sufi tradition, the Mansur al-Hallaj tradition, and others. But in some cases, as in this case, Kulliyāt-e-Faiz, you know, Quranic terminology, Quranic imagery, and so on. What he does with those things is pretty remarkable. But anyway, this anti-orthodox, anti-clerical poet, yet widely using religious idiom. This seemed to me a very interesting problem to try and think about. He's a person and a writer who's deeply influenced by the tradition of both Indian and European Marxist traditions, which are very distinct traditions. And Indian, I mean in the sense of South Asia, India in the original pre-47 sense. And he's introduced to Marxism, as I understand the biography, although we don't have really a very solid biographical account as well. In Amritsar, once he starts teaching there, and he meets, you know, the faculty there, Tasir and others, who influence him very deeply in this regard. It's through Communist Party that he meets Alice Faiz, who's a young communist who's come to India to sort of work for the nationalist anti-colonial struggle and so on. So very much influenced by this very radical, socially transformative tradition that desires social transformation. And yet he is, as a poet, and this is of course what you were emphasizing just now, primarily a poet who explores subjective states of mind, internal states of mind, feelings, affects that are of a subjective rather than external nature. We have terms for this in the Urdu tradition, for instance, Kharijiyat as opposed to Andruniyat and things of that sort. Okay, there is an older tradition of thinking about poetry that has sort of more externalist preoccupations as opposed to more subjective and internal explorations. Very often it's a single mind speaking to whom it's not clear and observing itself and observing its own feelings and thoughts and expressing its own feelings and thoughts. That's a very typical structure in Faiz's verse. In the ghazal certainly, but even in a lot of nazms, it seems to me. Think of a nazm like Yad, that which we know as Dasht-e-Tanhai. And of course, really focused on the whole question of ishq in the traditional manner and the entire problematic of hijr and visal in the traditional manner is at the core of his poem, this pining away for a beloved that is distant and so on and so forth. So what is a Marxist poet with political and social interests and concerns, spending so much of his energy, so much of his work, turning to these very traditional preoccupations of the Urdu tradition and more broadly the Persian and so on? That seemed to me a very interesting set of problems to try and think about. How does he reconcile these two things? Are they just sort of separate bodies of poems in which these things happen separately, or is there a way in which these two kinds of preoccupation are intertwined? On the other hand, despite this lyricism, as we might call it in literary criticism, I use this word, I think, probably for the first time in connection with Faiz's verse, the idea of the lyric, that so not to just think in Urdu genre terms, ghazal versus nazm and so on and so forth, but that what the nazm and the ghazal share in his corpus very often, with very few exceptions, is a sense of a kind of lyric exploration of, as I said, an internal subjective state. So, on the other hand, despite this lyricism and subjectivism, we might say, we are all familiar with this, he somehow condenses the history of our society into this language. Very often, very, very often, in many texts. Somehow, very important elements of the history of some society, let's bracket that question of, for a second, of which society exactly, is somehow condensed into the language even of the ghazal, I mean, there are notorious examples. If you think of the ghazal that actually has a title, which is very rare, of course. Ghazals don't typically have titles. Dhaka se Wapsi ke baad, am I remembering the title correctly? Dhaka se Wapsi ke baad. It's entirely a conventionally conceived ghazal, written in that manner of a subjective exploration of the longing for the beloved and separation from the beloved and so on. And yet it's, of course, as the title indicates, an exploration into the second partition of India within a quarter century, that is to say, the liberation of Bangladesh in 1961, and of course the war that led to that, and the genocide that led to that event. So the strange admixture of the subjective and the objective, we might say, and the personal and the historical, this is, I think, at the core of Faiz Sahib's accomplishment as an Urdu poet. And I think he's drawing on various Urdu traditions themselves in being able to achieve that, but really takes this possibility to a new place. One of the small ways in which he does this, and by no means the main way this happens is really in the text itself, but one of the smaller ways in which he does this is through his use of these extra textual elements, let's call them that. The technical term in literary criticism is paratext. Forgive me, I'm a nerdy literary critic. So, paratext, that is to say, texts that are not actually part of the integral poemic or fictional text, but are somehow attached to it from the outside, like title, like dedication, and in many cases, I mean, for you as an editor, it's a problem that not all his poems, or even most of them, have a date of composition, place of it. But it's actually remarkable how many have a date of composition compared to any other poets, really, in Urdu or elsewhere. The place and date of composition come attached to the poem very often. And I very quickly began to realize that very often the date is a historically meaningful date, like 14th August and things of that sort, okay? So through these external elements very often, like the title of Dhaka Se Wapsi Ke Baad, these external paratextual bits and pieces, he can move an otherwise very subjective poem towards this broader historical and objective direction. It's an extraordinary technique, really, the way he does that. So he's condensing the history of a society into these ghazals even, and into a lot of nazms that nevertheless have taghazul, you know, that have that quality of interiority and subjective. But the question is, which society exactly? Which society exactly is he telling the story of? I don't think the answer is necessarily so transparent as we sometimes take it to be. In Pakistan, of course, we often think of him as our national poet. I don't think I'm exaggerating, that we often think of him as the sort of national poet of this country and this nation and nation state, who even the Orthodox can't quite resist. Like Ashfaq Ahmad's famous preface that he wrote to one of his collections. Which collection is that? And I can't remember now.
I think Syed perhaps.
Syed, I think it's one of the 60s one. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Sorry, somebody see something? So even the Orthodox can't quite resist him, you know. That is to say, he is a poet of a kind of inclusive social totality somehow, in which the contradictions and conflicts of that society are somehow suspended in some manner. So yes, of course, there are pro and con positions on Faiz. Poetics or poetic culture is very much informed by those kinds of conflicts of interpretation. But there is something unique in Faiz that he seems to, and this is part of the softness that you also talk about in a way, right? That there usually is not, very rarely is there the fire and brimstone of Iqbal or anything like that, right? There is just this sense of encompassing a whole mode of life somehow with all its contradictions, all its internal splits and so on. So what does it mean to say that he's the national poet of Pakistan? Okay, in India they don't seem to think so right now. So that's a problem that seemed to me that we needed to address in some serious way. Do I have a few more minutes?
Maybe 5 minutes.
Okay. So my attempt to answer these questions, the way I began to attempt to answer these questions, or rather address these problems, is centered around the idea that beyond the divisions of genre, you know, nazm versus ghazal or whatever else, beyond the division of, let's say, the muzahimati shairi and the more kind of lyric poems, both nazm and ghazal and so on, what the corpus shares is, what it is centered around is the idea that the suffering self, the notorious suffering self of the Urdu tradition, of the ghazal in particular, in Faiz, the suffering self, the I that speaks, the I, the letter I, the me that speaks in his poems, is a divided self, a partitioned self. So the beloved for which the self, the mashuk for which the ashuk pines, is also recognized to be oneself. It's the self that is divided into lover and beloved. And as a number of poems, in Yad, for instance, you see these extraordinary moments in which the position of the lover and the beloved are mutually exchanged, where suddenly what was beloved becomes the active lover and not just the passive object of someone's love. So the self that emerges in Faiz's verse, I would say, is a self in partition, a partitioned self. And this in a strange way is also the case in the pre-partition poetry, actually, in many ways. But in any case, if we think of the post-partition poetry in this way, you know, in the 50s corpus, the poems written in the 50s, various ghazals and other things written in the 50s, there is a pining for the beloved, usually imagined to be just beyond a certain invisible line or something of that sort. Words like wahan, yahan recur in these poems. Even in Yad, in Dashti-Tanhai, which is late 50s, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I defer to you on all matters of actual scholarship in this regard. I can't keep the dates straight in my head. In other words, Faiz transforms this classical question of Hijr and Wisal, into a way of exploring social and historical questions. That's the extraordinary thing he does, without surrendering that quality of the intimate and the subjective and the private that Hijr and Wisal always are about, lover and beloved separated from each other, pining for each other, and so on. So that's sort of the core of my argument about Faiz, and if I had more time, we could have worked through a couple of poems, but
maybe in the Q&A.
Yeah, we can do that in the Q&A. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to pose maybe a question or a couple of questions, and then maybe we can open it up to the audience. So I think that thank you first of all. I think that what I said earlier about contrasting ways and original ways of reading Faiz, I think both our guests have shown us those very, very contrasting ways. But I think that one of the things that we can say that is at the center of this problematic that allows for these multiple readings is Faiz as a lyric subject, as Aamir kind of phrases it in his essay. His sensibility is formed in a world that is still very much tied to the classical poetics. And I think that this is also something that is very, very dear to Dr. Nomanul, and he writes about this in his preface, but I think we saw this in their conversation as well, that Faiz has served for all of us, including myself actually. He was the first poet that I went to, and I got introduced to Urdu poetry through Faiz, and I fell in love with Urdu poetry through Faiz. So it's remarkable that how over the years and over decades Faiz has served as an usher, as Dr. Nomanul phrased it, as an usher into the world of classical poetics. And I think that but this also is the problematic. I think what Aamir is suggesting is that perhaps that needs to be foregrounded in the historical moment in which he's composing it, but also the history that he wants to read, wants us to read his work as a part of. History is not secondary for Faiz himself. But again, so this is a question about his sensibility as a classical poet, and I think that Dr. Noman, I've heard him speak many a times about this very, very eloquently. But can you tell us a little more about Faiz and his connection to the larger world of classical Urdu and Persian and Arabic poetics?
Yes, I think it's working. Well, thank you very much, Bilal, for provoking me. I think that the happy difference of opinion that seems to exist between Aamir and myself is due to the fact that we have different formations. My formation is totally literary. I'm interested in the poetics of Faiz, not so much the externality of his poetry. Now, when we talk about Faiz, uttering poison in his very soft way, in his very civilized manner against the Mufti, against the Shah, I wonder how much that is a truth. Everybody has done that. Everyone has done that, whether it's Aamir or it is Musavi, it is Miladis, it is Nur Rashid, it is Ghalib, even Iqbal. Even Iqbal, he has, you know, he has said that Mullah ki haza aur hai, Mujahid ki haza aur hai, Mullah ki haza aur. Iqbal has said that. So I don't know how much it is a trope and how much, you know, it is meant. I think that Moin Nizami Sahab is here and he will give me the source. Somebody said that tasawwuf baraye sher guftan khub ast. Tasawwuf baraye sher guftan khub ast. If sher kehne ke liye tasawwuf chahiye, Sufi ho ya na ho. And we see that this trope is the framework in which they play the game. Every cricketer, whether he comes from some village, up in the north or from the south, he plays the cricket the same way, under the same rules. So there's a milieu, the poetic milieu, and Faiz Sahib is operating in that milieu. I have never said, it would be preposterous for me to say that Faiz does not have resistance. Faiz is not unhappy with certain things. I always say this, but for me the most important thing is that he gives it a poetic treatment. That is the most important thing. And so one, to equate blood with henna, only he could do this. एक हथेली पे henna, एक हथेली पे लहू, एक नजर जहर लिए, एक नजर में दारू. जब गाने की आवाज आ रही है तो कहाँ से आ रही है? गुलशन में से आ रही है या जेलखाने में कैदी का है? उनका आंचल है, रुखसार के पैरान है, कुछ तो है जिससे हुई जाती है चिलमन रंगीन. इतनी एस्थेटिक्स, इतना लिरिसिज्म, और यही दिस इज द सम बोनम फॉर मी, दिस इज द चीफ गुड ऑफ ऐसा फॉर मी. बाकी जो होगा सो होगा. तो इन उसको, आई मीन देयर इज अ कनेक्शन, but there's a complex connection, and that is this is the only thing I'm trying to say, that it is complex. जहाँ तक ताल्लुक नईम साहब का, नईम साहब can be very cynical, we all know that. Habib Jalib is a topical poet. लाड़काने चलो, जाके थाने चलो, ऐसे दस्तूर को, सुबह बेनूर को, मैं नहीं मानता, this is topical poetry. लेकिन रहगुज़र साए शजर मंजिल उतर हल्का बाम, ये पैकर साजी जो फैज़ साहब यहाँ पैकर बनाते चले जाते हैं, this contribution. So my formation is poetic. I'm interested in the poetics of Faiz basically. और वो बाहर जो हुआ वो किस हद तक ट्रोप है, रिवायत का हिस्सा है, तो हर जगह है. तो therefore for us to call Faiz, to classify him as Muzahimati, we have to know his biography, and I think that's unfair.
Right. I think that, can I ask you to speak a little more about perhaps one of the poems that where he invokes a classical trope, perhaps Baba Jana Chalo. Perhaps.
Yeah, I mean I remember that I was giving a lecture at Columbia, your university.
Not my university. I used to be.
You used to student. You were a student. Yeah, you were a student. Alma Mater. Yes, Francis Pritchard invited me to talk about Faiz, and I was talking about Faiz's treatment of Halaj. Halaj is the imagery of Halaj is so much in Faiz. Somebody stood up and he said, if Faiz to kafir tha, तो फैज़ का क्या ताल्लुक़ है तसव्वुफ़ से? आप कैसी बात कर रहे हैं, खामोश हो गए. तो we don't dismiss Faiz to kafir. Now ये काफिर जो है, इस पर इतना गहरा असर है कि सारा आज बाजार में आप जो ना चलो, है ना? This is really a versed rendition of Kitab al-Tawassul, and I have the text exactly. हाकिम शहर भी, मजमा-ए आम भी, संग दुश्तान भी, पीर इल्ज़ाम भी. This is exactly what it is. ज़ंजीरों में रास करते हुए वो जा रहे हैं और हाकिम शहर भी मौजूद है, लोग पत्थर भी मार रहे हैं, शिवली ने फूल फेंका जिस पे वो रोए. All this is part of Kitab al-Tawassul. Sahab has absorbed that. And then ज़िंदा शोरे अलग हक, this is that. ज़िंदा शोरे अलग हक, महफिल उलमाए. हमी से सुन्नते मंसूर और कैस ज़िंदा, हमी से बाकी है तरदामनी और कच्छ कुलही. This is Faiz is so much rooted in the classics and in the tradition. We whatever he is, I think that his lyricism, in which, I mean, I've never I've never understood that somebody who is so muzahimati would not break the chains, would not remove the locks, but would teach the chains to sing. Would teach that in tawqo salasil ko hum tum sikhlayenge shorish barbat wa naye, वो शोरिश जिसके आगे जुबूं हंगामा तबले कैसर व कै आज़ाद ने अपने फिक्र अमल भरपूर खजीना हिम्मत का एक उम्र है अपनी हर साहब इमरूज दिस इज पोइट्री। उनको इस बात का गम नहीं है कि लोगों को सलीब पर चढ़ाया जा रहा है, उनको इस बात का गम है कि बाद सबा को सलीब पर चढ़ाना है। हाँ, बाद सबा अगर गई तो इस्तिआरा गया, मेटाफर गया तो पोइट्री गई। This is his problem. किसी पे करते हैं अबरे बहार को, किसी पे कत्ले महताब ना करते हैं, किसी पे होती है सरमस्त शाखसार दुनीम, किसी पे बाद सबा को हलाक करते हैं। This is the problem of Faiz। बाद सबा मर गई तो मैं शायरी क्या करूँगा? देखिए दस्ते सबा नाम रखें। तो ये बात मैं कह रहा हूँ, मेरा मतलब ये नहीं है कि फैज साहब से हम इक्तसाब नहीं कर सकते in terms of जज्बा जो उनके अंदर है। उनके दर्दमंदी तो बहुत है फैज साहब के यहाँ, दर्दमंदी तो बहुत है, उनके दर्दमंद शायर हैं वो, इसमें कोई शक नहीं है। लेकिन उनको बिल्कुल वो we have to be very very careful not to compromise his complexity, and we must always view him in the context of the milieu, which is the classical milieu in which he was writing. This is my position.
Thank you. That's very
I was going to pose the same kind of problematic, that he's a subject that's been formed, of sensibilities entirely formed, as Dr. Nomanul showed us, but he's deploying it perhaps at critical historical moments for...
Of course, the tasawwuf is present in his work, but he does something somewhat new with it. He's not just writing like a poet of the 19th century. So the question is how we understand that novelty. But the thing is, so I agree with you absolutely about the complexity, but the way I see it, Nomanul, is the complexity is precisely this thing, that he does both things. He does not let go of either of them. Right. That's the complexity. And to him, poetry is not in contradiction with looking at the world and looking at the suffering of the world. It's not in contradiction. He takes the classical tradition, which is very inward-looking, of course, or at least it is said that it is inward-looking. There's a whole century of criticism, both by Indian nationalists, Hindi nationalists, the inventors of modern Hindi in the 19th century, like Bharatanda and Trivedi and others, but also Muhammad Hussain Azad, also within the Urdu tradition, right, of excoriating the ghazal for its internal obsessions, its narcissism, its failure to look at the external world, that even nature is this artificial bagicha of some sort, it's not actual nature and so on. Given that history that by the time Faiz was writing, it's already 60, 70 years old, from the middle of the 19th century, after the mutiny, it seems to me, First War of Independence, that he takes that tradition, but he says he does something new with it. But of course, he talks about it in his own poems. So, अगर आप ये नज़्म जो आप सबको मालूम होगी, ये ज़ाहिर बात है, मुझसे पहली सी मोहब्बत मेरी महबूब नमान, इसमें क्या कह रहे हैं? मुझसे पहली सी मोहब्बत मेरी महबूब नमान, मैंने समझा था कि तू है तो दरख्शां है यार, मैंने समझा था in the past tense, तेरा गम है तो गमे दहर का झगड़ा क्या है, तेरी सूरत से है आलम में बहारों को सवाल, तेरी आंखों के सिवा दुनिया में रखा क्या है, तू जो मिल जाए तो तकदीर निगूह हो जाए. And then there's a break, really, if you pay attention to the language. यूं न था, मैंने फकत चाहता यूं हो जाए, और भी दुख हैं ज़माने में मोहब्बत के सिवा, राहतें और भी हैं बस की राहत के सिवा. And then, of course, there's extremely visceral, physical language of wounds that are festering. अनगिनत सदियों के तारीख बहिमाना तलस्म रेशम और अतलस और कमखार में बनवाए हुए, जा बजा बिकते हुए कूचा बाजार में जिस्म खाक में लुथड़े हुए अफीम में नहलाए बगैर. Now Nurjahan tries to read the entire poem as if it's a ghazal, in the same intonation, the way in which the first half is read, the invocation of the beauty and the love for the beloved and so on, and then this confession that this was not true, it was some illusion. There are these other things too that that call for the poet's attention. And of course, it ends it with exactly by saying that. और भी दुख है ज़माने में मोहब्बत के सिवा, राहतें और भी हैं वस्ल की राहत के सिवा, मुझसे पहली सी मोहब्बत में महबूब समा. So he himself is aware that this tradition is in the past, that he cannot do without this tradition, but that there are some other realities that he must also confront. And it's this challenge of how to keep these two things together in the same poetic utterance. That's his accomplishment as far as I see it. How you manage to do both those things somehow and keep them in the same poetic expression, the same poetic thought, let's say, and not separate them out into different kinds of things or put them in conflict with each other. That's what I would say.
Thank you. We can take a couple of questions if there are any.
I can resort to Faisab's language and speak in Urdu. सितंबर 2018 में आपने एक आर्टिकल लिखा था डॉन में, आई थिंक वाज कॉल्ड स्टम्बलिंग ओवर फैज, अहले हिकम और अहले हकम, उसी में एक बात वो आपने, हम देखेंगे कि उसमें जो मिसरा है अहले हिकम के सर ऊपर जब बिजली कट देगी. तो मेरे एक ही सवाल के दो हिस्से, एक तो ये कि मुझे, अगर मैं गुस्ताखी है क्योंकि मुझे वो अहले हकम ही लगता है, क्योंकि जब बिजली कड़क रही है तो वो हिकमत वालों के ऊपर क्यों कड़केगी, अगर उन पर कड़क रही है तो फिर वो हिकमत वाले हैं ही नहीं. तो पहला. दूसरा, उस आर्टिकल में आपने जो फैज साहब की मशहूर नज़्म है दो इश्क, उसमें भी फैज साहब ने आखिर में कहा कि गरजे हैं बहुत अहले हिकम बरसरे दरबार, तो उसका हवाला ही नहीं दिया. तो जरा अहले हकम और अहले हिकम की अगर जरा सी तशरीह कर दें तो.
एक चीज मैं कह दूं सर, रिकॉर्डिंग ऑफ फैज साहब रीडिंग हम देखेंगे in which he says हकम.
Well, one of the editions that came out in Faisab's lifetime, it has been vocalized, and it has been vocalized correctly. It is hikam, the plural of hikmah, and it has been vocalized. There is a zair under the ha and the zabar over the kaf, but he has done that himself. लेकिन मैं आपको बात बताऊं कि दो बातें, एक तो ये कि hikam is the plural of hikmah. And we have a very famous work by Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi, which is called Fusus al-Hikam. बहुत मशहूर.
Can I ask you to recite the poems a little bit so that, for context, for audiences who might not be familiar, and also the different ramifications of the word, of the pronunciation.
वो कुछ इस तरह है कि वो अहले हिकम के सर ऊपर बिजली करके की in the famous हम देखेंगे वाली poem जो है, which I think everybody knows. अच्छा, लेकिन इसकी रिवायत यूँ है, देखिए सर, हर चीज़ का करीना होता है. अब वो तो हकम का कुछ बनता नहीं, हकम तो the deciding factor is called हकम, तो अहले हकम क्या हुआ, that is meaningless in Arabic. अब जो हिकम का मसला ये है कि this is a tradition, Islamic religious writings. सबसे पहले अज़ाब उन लोगों पर आएगा जो हिकमत वाले हैं, जिन्होंने इस्लाह नहीं की, जिन्होंने अपने फ़ायदे के लिए इल्म हासिल किया. ग़ज़ाली, for example, in his Tahafut al-Falasifa, and in the other one, Ihya al-Ulum fil Islam, उसमें भी उन्होंने ये बात कही है कि सबसे पहले अज़ाब तो उतरेगा उन्हीं लोगों पर, those knowledgeable scholars who really gathered knowledge for their own benefit and did not really contribute to society. God will punish them first. So this is very much in keeping with their tradition. Faisab knew that. He must have read Ghazali, he could read Arabic. It is in the tradition, and it is in constant tradition. तो वो अगर उसको हकम कर दिया, बल्कि मुझे तो किस बात का है कि उन्होंने हुक्म तो लजीज हुक्म करो जी, हुक्म करो. मुझे याद है कि वो जब हमारे अजीज करोड़ों रुपए कमाने वाले राहत फतेह खान साहब ने कहा अहले हुक्म, तो one graduate of Lums, Aziz Shagird, who worked for the Chief Justice, Umar Gilani, he called me at midnight. Sir, ये क्या हो गया? ये अहले हुक्म कर दिया उसने, मैंने कहा इसकी जिम्मेदारी अदील हाशमी पर होगी. Then I did call Adil Hashmi. Adil did respond. He said, मैं हूँ, मैं की करा. हो गया तो हो गया, अब क्या हो सकता है, उसने तो गा दिया, अब तो चला भी गया, हर चैनल पर गाया जा रहा है। तो ये बातें तो ये हमारी अब देखिए, आई एम सो सॉरी आई शुड बी स्पीकिंग लाइक दिस इन पब्लिक। कल लाहौर लिटरेरी फेस्टिवल हुआ, उसमें जब दीज आइज नजर कहते हैं उसको, नजर नून रे, उसको नजर लिखा है, नून साल में नजर और है, नजर और चीज है, अपनी वफा, अपनी जान नजर करूं अपनी वफा पे, नजर को लोग नजर कहते हैं, और फिर वो सुनते हैं पढ़ते नहीं है, वो जाल है, वो जाल नहीं है, वो लाहौर लिटरेरी फेस्टिवल में इज्तिमाई को इज्तिमाई लिखा, इज्तिमाई नहीं लिखा, इज्तिमाई। This is how it is. People don't know. कली गाते हैं, but they don't know. I'm very happy that Aamir is referring to it by its title. वो यत्ता वचोरबिक लोगों को नहीं मालूम है, अगर मैं दिखा भी देता हूँ तो पढ़ नहीं पाते हैं, अगर it's fully vocalized in the works. तो ये बात है, उसका करीना है, जैसे tradition. First, linguistically, lexically it makes no sense. Secondly, it is in the tradition that the first one to be punished are those who knew but did not help the society, but really they filled their own pockets with money. This is in the tradition, in constant tradition. That is what it is.
So I think your argument is very compelling, and of course very erudite. I can't say I'm fully convinced, forgive me please.
No, you have to be convinced. I mean, I have no room for I have no room for disagreement here. How come makes no sense?
Okay, except for two things. Faiz himself has recorded it, has recited the poem in which he says Hakam. This is easily available. आप उनसे कहिए ना, फैज साहब से कहिए।
फैज साहब ने वोकलाइज कर दिया था उसको। I can show you the text. If you can show me the recording, मुंह से निकल गया। If you can show me the.
I mean, after talking about the inconsistencies and errors in publishing in Pakistan, you are resting it all on this one there-zabar question in one.
I am attached to what is correct. I am attached to it. You see.
The other thing is in the next line, the equivalent intention with whatever it is महकूमों के पाँव तले।
तो हकम से महकूम का कोई ताल्लुक नहीं है, वो तो हुक्म से महकूम का ताल्लुक है। हकम is a legal fiqhi term.
Right.
It's a fiqhi term which means that which arbiter is the hikam. आपके मेरे दरमियान ये हिकम है। तो अहले हिकम का कोई तुक नहीं बनता ना। If you know Arabic, ask any Arabic. It will make no sense. इनमें अगर फैज साहब ने कहा तो फैज साहब से गफलत हो गई होगी, वो इंसान है, क्या नहीं कोई बात। फैज साहब की ताज़ीम, उनकी तकरीम वो तो हम पर फर्ज है, लेकिन उन्होंने उसको अब एक गलती को जस्टिफाई नहीं करना चाहिए, उसको नहीं करना चाहिए। वो फुसूल हिकम को क्या करेंगे आप? फुसूल हिकम तो ट्रेडिशन का हिस्सा है अरबी की। उसकी बात है कि पीपल डोंट हैव एनी ग्राउंडिंग इन अरबिक। वो रहा नहीं ना, अरबी जानने वाले कहाँ रहे हैं? इट कैन नॉट पॉस। आई मीन आप इस आंखों पर जो बात आप कहते हैं आई लर्न फ्रॉम यू, लेकिन हिकम और हुक्म पे तो हम
नहीं कर सकते। I'm almost convinced by it.
Thank you.
Can we move to the, of course, Sarah?
Thank you for that. So I just have so my question is really, so listening to all of this, I'm coming from a very uninformed place, so I'll just say that. But listening to this, it seems to me that there's a story that is perhaps not being told or is being told about the poetic subjectivity of the Urdu literary tradition, and can that tradition be a tradition that can be that consciousness can be world changing or not? And there's an argument, implicit argument to be made there. Perhaps I wonder if you can say something about that, and what are the stakes of that argument? Where are we going if we consider this poetic subjectivity one that can be revolutionary or world changing? This sort of lyrical inwardness that you speak of and that you also.
Well, I want to be careful. I'm not talking about in general about Urdu poetry or anything like that. I'm talking about what I see as the conception of the Urdu tradition that appears sometimes in Faiz's verse, sometimes. And it's recognizable from the wider literary debates. My training is literary. I'm a literary scholar and literary historian. So the literary debates and linguistic debates, the whole Urdu-Hindi question from the mid-19th century onwards, in part, the polemics in part hinge on what is taken to be the inwardness of the Urdu tradition, aside from its alienness and all of that, vocabulary that is not indigenous and so on and so forth, and poetic traditions and images that are not indigenous, but that it remains self-enclosed, you know. And of course, the whole Nai Roshni people, the Aligarh people themselves, not just the Hindi nationalists, are saying that this is no longer capable of addressing the realities of the contemporary world. Okay? And the progressive in some ways take that on, but not Faiz. That's a remarkable thing. Instead of saying that and producing didactic poems or something of that sort, you know, Sardar Jafri at one point said that Faiz writes propaganda. Sorry, not Sardar Jafri.
I have Janisar Akhtar.
Janisar Akhtar, sorry, yeah. Actually said this, okay, about Faiz. Syed Mahmud, on the other hand, who was of course one of the leading figures of the opposing school, said in an interview to Asif Aslam towards the end of his life, "मैं फैज साहब को इस सबसे बड़ा शायर समझता हूँ इस दौर का." Okay, very clear. Anyway, so the question is for Faiz, he's situating himself, seeing himself in a certain point in history, in a certain world, in a certain society, and dealing with the tradition that has been handed down to him, which he takes very, very seriously, but he's not just performing that tradition. He's not just performing that tradition. I really don't see how that can be said unless you look at it very, very selectively. I'm not saying you're saying that. But he's doing something with it. He's doing something very complex with it, and that's what I'm trying to understand. Okay? And in several of these pieces, he addresses that question. Though Ishq is another piece in which he addresses that question. But he comes at it from the other direction, actually. Not from the direction of the external, but ends in fact with the internal in some ways again. The Ishq question, in other words, in Urdu poetic terms. So his whole challenge is how to make that tradition alive again, which for 60, 70 years, even Urdu poetics has been saying is a dead tradition. Through this half assimilation of a Victorian sort of utilitarian aesthetics by a bad reading of, I don't know, John Stuart Mill or someone like that. These Urdu folks who didn't read English very well, by the way, okay, they were partly literate in English, who are most influenced by a kind of Victorian aesthetic, or as they see, as they sort of understand this Victorian aesthetic. So Faiz is really, I mean, what I have against the Jadidiyat folks is, in some ways, Faiz and his contemporaries, like Makhdoom and others, are really saving the Ghazal tradition. You know, they're not discarding the Ghazal tradition, and without them, that debate might still have been going on. That debate about the relevance of the Ghazal to modern life and to modern sensibility and so on.
Sure. I mean, yeah, I think maybe one more question. I think Kamran had a question that. Yeah, I think I would prefer students, preferably females.
Are very familiar with Urdu literature and a product of that second language Urdu course of Cambridge. How should we start with Faiz and how do we go through it?
Well, fortunately, you know, some sources are available. I think that Victor Kiernan's work is very useful.
Very good.
Kiernan has done three things. He has first transliterated the poems, so you know how to read it. So they're fully vocalized. Secondly, he has given a literal translation, and then he has given a poetic rendering. And of course, there is the Urdu text. It's very, very useful. So you have the Urdu text, you have the transliteration, you have literal translation, and you have poetic rendering. So it is really, really very useful. You can actually start with Victor Kiernan, and Faiz's language is really very smooth. It's not very difficult at all. And I think that to use Faiz as the usher, as I said, into the poetry is something very useful. He brings things because he's so attractive and he's so nice. He's so gentle. You go gently into it. You know, you better not touch Walid. It was very, very difficult. And you know, he would stop you at the door. He would just stop you at the door. And so on. So there are sources available. You can start with that. And then read Aamir Mufti and read Nomanul and
If I may say just one thing that I forgot to mention earlier. I don't know how familiar people are with this interview, this conversation that Faiz Saab had on Radio Pakistan in the late 1960s. We were in contact about that actually, I think if you remember correctly. I still want to talk to you about that. I tried to have somebody translate it. First of all, just kind of do a transcript in Urdu itself, and they made such a mess of it that I just never got beyond it. But it's a very interesting conversation with leading figures, including Ghulam Tabassum and so on, in which Faiz Saab uses the phrase lyrical politics to describe his aesthetics. Okay?
That's very nice.
In English, he uses the phrase lyric. I had used the phrase lyric history several years before I encountered this interview, which Radio Pakistan has been releasing its archives, I believe. So this was one of them. It's a beautiful conversation in which he talks in detail about the influence of the English romantics on him, the late romantics in particular, even Auden in the 20th century. So I would just say that the question of the Riwayat is very, very close to his heart, but he's not a slavish performer of tradition or repeater of tradition. That I simply cannot see in his work.
Yes. And it's very dear to my heart. एक तो वो उनकी नज़्म के वो जब से बेनूर हुई हैं शामें ख्वाब में ढूंढता फिरता हूँ न जाने किस्सा खो गई हैं मेरी दोनों आँखें ब्लैक आउट तुम जो आपको फिक्र बता कोई पहचान गई. So that is one, but the other one was Heart Attack. They both have English titles, Black Out and Heart Attack. दर्द इतना था कि उस रात दिले वहशी ने हर रगे जान से उलझना चाहा. दर्द इतना था कि उस रात दिले वहशी ने हर रगे जान से उलझना चाहा, हर बुने मुंह से टपकना चाहा. और कहीं दूर तेरे सहन ने चमन में गोया पत्ता पत्ता मेरे अफसरदा लहू में धुल कर हुस्न महताब से आज़ुर्दा नजर आने लगा. मेरे वीराना ये तन में गोया सारे दुखते हुए रेशों की तनावें खुलकर सिलसिलावार पता देने लगी रुखसत काफिले शौक की तैयारी का. और जब याद की बुझती हुई शमों में नजर आया कहीं एक पल आखिरी लम्हा तेरी दिलदारी का. दर्द इतना था कि उससे भी गुजरना चाहा, हमने चाहा भी मगर दिल न ठहरना चाहा. This is वैसा मंजर नाम की कई नज़में हैं, एक ही नहीं कई नज़में हैं मंजर की. रह गुजर सायद शजर मंजिल अंदर हल्क़े बाम. Now this is what I mean, Pakistani, and there is no verb in it. Nouns after nouns after nouns after strings of nouns, strings of nouns. रह गुजर सायद शजर मंजिल अंदर हल्क़े बाम. बाम पर सीना महताब खुला आहिस्ता जैसे खोली हुई बंदे कबा आहिस्ता. हल्क़े बाम तले सायों का ठहरा हुआ नील की झील में चुपके से तैरा किसी पत्ते का हवा. एक पल तैरा चला फूट गया आहिस्ता, बहुत आहिस्ता बहुत हल्का. रंग शराब मेरे शीशे में ढला आहिस्ता. शीशा और जाम सुराही तेरे हाथों की गुलाब जिस तरह दूर किसी ख्वाब का नक्श आभिया बना और मिटा आहिस्ता. दिल ने दोहराया कोई हर्फ वफा आहिस्ता. दिल ने दोहराया कोई हर्फ वफा आहिस्ता. तुमने कहा आहिस्ता, चांद ने झुक के कहा और आहिस्ता.